Great. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me. Um, as you were talking, Marion, I wanted to pull up a few images because I've been thinking about this a lot this week. Texas, they have snow, and this is not something that's very common. They have a lot of it right now, and it's ironic in a lot of ways, actually. Um, when I think of energy efficiency technology that has been developed in the last 10 years, a lot of it, such as rock wool, such as aero barrier, has been piloted in Texas. Some of the most interesting energy efficiency technologies. And yet, what's interesting is I keep hearing reports of uh, people not being able to run their water because it's so cold in their houses and they don't have electricity. People freezing cold and having to move out of their houses into a warming center. What's interesting is that if they employed some of these technologies, if it was more widespread, these technologies that could be employed that were piloted in that state, I wonder what their situation would be in this if this snowstorm came again, or if they had done it before the snowstorm. I'm not saying that energy efficiency solves everything. That's not the case, but it does help us weather certain storms, such as this. I will just share a PowerPoint here. So what I wanted to take you through tonight was just some of the things that I've been learning. Oh, it's so interesting that it doesn't share properly. What are you folks seeing? Are you seeing a full screen or are you seeing a screen with slides on the side?
Green
So
slides on the side.
I don't know why my presentation is doing this.
That's all right. We can see the screen quite well.
Okay, well, I'll keep on going like this. So um, the Ecology Action Center, if you haven't heard of it, it's a nonprofit organization. We focus on everything from energy, wilderness, built environment, marine, coastal, food, and we actively do workshops, awareness campaigns, public debates, and everything related to that. Really, I'm doing a retrofit project right now. That's essentially a pilot for a new type of retrofit technology on multi-unit residential buildings. Um,
Oh,
but what I find most interesting and what I wanted to talk a little bit more tonight about, taking into account that I will be talking about energy efficiency and solar, because I know those are hot topics, is what makes a building sustainable. And I really like to think about faith-based buildings. What's very interesting is that is actually a picture of the and everyone is seeing a picture, right? Because
yeah.
it's weird. My two screens are not actually changing slides the same way. It's yeah, it's throwing me off. But glad you're all seeing the right picture. So Unitarian Church, they ended up moving to a housing, an old house rather than staying in the larger building that they had. And that's been working quite well for them. That Unitarian Church in Halifax, it operates in one part of the house, and the other part of the house is used as a daycare during the day. So it has a lot more use. It's also something that they can ensure they can manage sustainably moving forward. All the spaces in that building are used at least 5 days a week, if not 7. And there's never a time that they have to turn down the heat or think about changing the circumstances because the rooms are not being used that much. A building that's used in a variety of ways does a number of things. And the reason why I think about this so much now is when it comes to rebate programs that exist right now for faith-based institutions, and I'll be talking more about that later, they do recognize that they look at how much energy you're using. And if you fall under a certain amount, then that's the types of rebates that are available to you. I was just actually talking to someone from Efficiency Nova Scotia, and they were to explain to me that if there's a 15-year payback on a 15-year or less payback on a PV solar array for a faith-based nonprofit organization, they can get rebates from Efficiency Nova Scotia through the business program. But the reason that, and to keep in mind, this is a 15-year payback. What that means is that you're calculating the usage of the building, the consumption of the building, and because that consumption is at a level where there's enough solar array that needs to be built up, the offset of those two things works out to a 15-year payback. So the amount of money you get for putting that solar energy into the grid is offsetting the cost of your electricity in the building. And so thinking about how we can make use of these buildings more is very important. I've encountered some really interesting examples in the last few months of what churches have been doing since the pandemic. And a number of them have been taking advantage of a space that's not being used so that they can do retrofits that they would never have considered before. The world is changing. I'm just going to bring this up for United Churches. It's the Faithful Footprints program. It just changed. So before it was 2 different grants, and now it offers a single grant, but the grant has a bit of a diversity in the sense that $20,000 can be accessed by United Churches for energy efficiency improvements, and an additional $10,000 of the same grant application, additional $10,000 can be accessed if a church is trying to essentially decarbonize. They're trying to replace their heating system that's oil with something that's not as fossil fuel heavy, such as electric. So that's happening right now with the Faithful Footprints program. But one thing I wanted to start off with right off the bat is thinking about how you build in sustainability into the planning of your congregation and your building. It's really important to think about what is used all the time, what is not used all the time, and why. And it could be a number of reasons why. For example, you could have a church basement. That church basement might have bare concrete walls with electrical just being open, either wired along the wall or wired in the ceiling, but everything's open and anything can be touched. And maybe no one uses that space because it might not be that safe to use. The reasons for not using a space is not a bad thing, but it's something to consider. And if that space is not being used at all or to its full effectiveness, what can you change about it to make it more useful? And what kind of opportunities could actually present themselves if you change that space to make it more useful? And what's interesting is that energy efficiency does play a huge role in that. Trinity United Church in Rose Bay, Nova Scotia, they ended up putting heat pumps into their community hall, which was attached to their sanctuary. And they specifically did this because in the wintertime, their community hall was too cold. So they couldn't have many bookings in the wintertime throughout the week because of that. And they could have updated their oil heating system, but in the end, the other thing they wanted was to make that hall cooler in the summertime. And they were able to do that with the heat pump installations. They were actually, it was a combination of things. They insulated the walls in that community hall and the ceiling, and they put in heat pumps. So it was a two-in-one thing. One to make, because they needed to make that space warmer. And efficiency actually works in a number of ways. If you think about it, a passive house has an enormous amount of insulation, and what is also a key with a passive house is that the air escaping from the house is reduced dramatically. When you're testing for a passive house standard, they do a test where they measure how much air is escaping from the building using a blower door test. And if that blower door test does not come out with a low enough number of air exchange units, then that's not considered a passive house. What's interesting that I've found with a passive house is that they don't need air conditioning in the summertime. They also don't need much heating at all in the wintertime. The reason for that is that they have so much insulation that the exterior environment is impacting them to the least amount possible. Now think about that. That's, if you could do that in a church, there's so many things that could be possible. If there's a storm and power is out everywhere, but you don't need power to heat a space to keep it warm, then imagine what that space could be in times of a storm. Imagine what that space could be if you actually were able to provide power, such as a Tesla battery electricity storage system that's now being done through Nova Scotia Power through a pilot program, or if you needed to an off-grid solar array. There's tons of possibilities out there. But you don't have to invest a lot in order to make change. There's so many things you can do that are under $10. One of the ones that I love to bring up is basically trying to I call them air parties, or essentially you're just trying to install as much silicone along the edges of windows, doors. You're trying to install door sweeps. You're trying to line windows with liners as much as possible to make sure that air doesn't escape. You could have a giant party with 30 volunteers where they're all just showing them some simple techniques with a silicone gun. You could really transform an entire space to make it much more airtight. And that, most of those materials, other than the silicone gun, which is maybe $15, but most of that can be $10 or less. There's also looking at LED light bulbs, if you're just replacing single red light bulbs. And most importantly, looking at the leadership of these sustainable actions, these changes. You want people on a board, whether it's the property board or if it's a board that's just a green team that's trying to make change. You want people that are A, understand the building, B, understand how the building is used, and C, hopefully have some kind of background that can assist in everything. What's great about certain boards that I've come across is that, they have an engineer, so the engineer can look over some documents, things like that. I'm not saying you should change your boards to suit these needs, but I'm just saying that these things are all helpful. Let's move on. There is a key to understanding your building. And when it comes to energy efficiency, you can do an energy audit. These things are offered. So what's great is that there's energy auditing programs for churches in New Brunswick, PEI, and Nova Scotia. In New Brunswick, it would be through an energy management service provider. In PEI, they actually have a specific setup. So it would be, I believe, HomeSol would be doing the energy audit, but it's through a specific commercial program in PEI. And then in Nova Scotia, there's a couple different avenues. You can do a small business energy audit, but beware, you can pay for one of those through Efficiency Nova Scotia and get a recommendation there. You might be able to get a free energy audit, but that through the small business program. But that requirement, what I learned was that you need to have a high energy consumption right off the bat. Otherwise, you might not be able to get that free energy audit. So those free energy audits are for buildings that are consuming a huge amount of electricity, and they want to give that building a break, essentially, and do that free energy audit. And then the other ways to do an energy audit in Nova Scotia is through energy auditors that are trained to provide energy audits for commercial buildings. A church is big enough to be considered a commercial entity or a commercial building. It's funny too, because a church also has a lot of the same qualities as a house. So it really does fall into this middle ground when it comes to energy auditing. And the other way, and so those specific auditors, one is Tate Engineering, and another that comes to mind is HomeSol. But then there is also the green audit, which is offered by Faith in the Common Good, and it's done virtually. So you could actually have a green audit done. And the reason why an energy audit is so important in most cases is that it gives you an understanding of the building and what you could do to change it and the possible savings involved with that. And both the energy audits that are offered in the provinces and the green audit offered by the Faith in Common Good does that. The only difference is that the energy audits in each of these provinces are not are connected to existing rebate programs, whereas the green audit is not recognized. So depending on what your church is considering before you even think about an energy audit, you can consider a green audit if you're thinking that you're not going to be able to get a lot of rebates, or a energy audit if you do think you are that you are eligible for a lot of rebates. And you could talk to each of these the organizations, so Save Energy New Brunswick and Efficiency PEI and all these organizations to talk about that. We're going to go into energy efficiency. Now, I actually specifically listed these terms in this way. I went from the most cost-effective to the least cost-effective. The reason I did this was because as you can see, some of the things that stand out the most to some people when they see upgrades being done to a building are windows and the type of heating that's installed in the building. But as you can see here, those aren't necessarily the most cost effective. In some cases they are, but in most, especially for windows, in most cases they're not. Air sealing, where when you're installing weather stripping, door sweeps, indoor and outdoor silicone sealant, these are all very effective ways to reduce warm air escaping your building. Appliances in faith-based buildings are a huge energy consumer. It's been identified, and it's quite interesting. The reason being that people love to donate old fridges to churches, and churches will take them. Then we get into lighting, converting to LEDs, and you'd be surprised, sometimes lighting comes before appliances, as in sometimes it's more cost effective to change your old T8 light bulb fixtures to LED replacement fixtures. Sometimes you can get a payback in less than 6 months. So they pay for themselves in 6 months. Installation, very cost effective. In churches, I find the most of the easiest places to put insulation are in attic spaces. There are many exceptions to that because there are tons of different architectural designs out there. And then sometimes basements as well, depending on what was done in the basement originally. And then you get into heating, and converting to heat pumps or natural gas are the most common ways that churches are reducing their energy. Well, basically they're having more effective energy or heating systems that use less energy. And then there's windows. Now, I'm just going to stop sharing this and get into, just get into sharing something else here. So when we talk about energy efficiency, there's many different programs out there. I'm just going to take you through a few.
Ben, I was saying you have 20 minutes if you want to have time for questions, okay?
Okay, thank you. These are the service providers that I was talking about for New Brunswick. Capital Management is the one I'm most familiar with. Jim Knight. The reason why I point out that one is that Jim and I have had many conversations, and he's very familiar with doing energy audits and doing energy management solutions for churches and faith-based buildings in New Brunswick. There is energy efficiency programming, again, for churches and faith-based buildings in Newfoundland and Labrador through the Take Charge program. And there is the small business program through Efficiency Nova Scotia. What I will say is that what's been the case, I was just talking to the administrator of that small business program today. What's been the case for the Nova Scotia program is that most cases the churches end up being able to do a lighting rebate and then sometimes a heating rebate. And the heating rebate is quite good for the small business program. You can get some quite great payback from a heat pump that's installed with $500, $1,000 off rebate with Efficiency Nova Scotia. But you have to be heating your building by electricity for the small business program right now. That might change in the future, but right now. So what's interesting is that not a lot of churches can access the heating rebate through the small business program because they are using usually oil. Now, unfortunately, that's the case right now. And that's only the case right now. Things change over time, and Efficiency Nova Scotia is changing all the time. The other things that I will get into, wow, and it switched right to the end. I don't really like how my PowerPoint's not cooperating with me. There are also great resources of DIY walkthrough audits, energy efficiency guides. There's an Energy Star Action Workbook. All three of these guides are available off the Faith in the Common Good website, so I would check that out. But we can now go into renewable energy. Renewable energy, solar, it's sexy. Everyone loves it. And there's a lot going on right now with that. And Helga, I'm really curious if Don Roscoe designed your house. You said it was a passive solar house, so I'm really curious about that.
And we're totally happy with it. He did a great job.
Okay. For those who don't know, Don Roscoe, if this is being recorded, I'm sorry, Don. He is the godfather of passive solar. And if you want to talk passive solar, he's the person to talk to. It's
exactly. And you can come over to our house and see how pretty it is.
There's some amazing houses in Nova Scotia that are heated all by sunlight, or mostly by sunlight. And passive solar is a great way, a great renewable way to heat a building. If it's designed right at the start, it's kind of hard to implement passive solar to heat an entire building after it's been built, but it has been done. There's thermal hot water solar systems, which are promoted through the Efficiency Nova Scotia program, as well as other efficiency programs in other provinces. There's photovoltaic solar systems, again, slowly starting to be supported. Efficiency PEI actually has a great commercial program that churches can get access to get up to $10,000 off of their photovoltaic solar systems that they install. So that is a great resource. Small wind turbine systems. I've seen some interesting combinations on schools where they do a solar array on one side, and then because they couldn't do enough solar, they did 1 to 2 wind turbines, on top of the roof of these buildings. These hybrid systems are very effective because with wind and solar combined, you essentially flatten out a curve of production. Solar, you tend to have a production go up and down throughout the year. Wind as well, but when you have both of them together, they tend to balance each other out. And these are the types of programs or resources that you can access right now. So there's the Solar City PACE program it provides financing, as well as Solar Colchester. There's the PEI Solar Electric Rebate Program, and then CanSIA's Go Solar Guide. I'm going to share my screen on that because that one is my favorite. Anything that you wanted to know about solar is in this guide. It talks about existing solar programs. It talks about what a solar system is, the different types of solar systems. everything you need to know is in here. So I definitely recommend it. You can search it on Google. It's CanSIA and Efficiency Nova Scotia's Go Solar Guide. And it's extremely helpful. The one thing that I will point out, and I'd like to differentiate and make sure everyone understands, is that you have solar panels and there's many varieties with different wattages. The various watts does not necessarily mean that, so if you had a 340 watt panel and a 300 watt panel being used in a large array, it doesn't mean that the 340 watt panel is more efficient than the 300 watt panel. Just going to point that out. It's basically, they design them in different sizes because as they get better at designing solar panels, they can make them bigger, and then sometimes they make them smaller to reduce weight on roofs. So the wattage doesn't really matter with the panels as much. What is more important, though, is the type of inverter used. You have string inverters. You also have microinverters, and then you have string inverters with optimizers, or an optimized string inverter system. Microinverters are very popular right now because they are easy to install, and they're a smart system. They essentially can modulate each panel and think of them as little computers. They can monitor and adjust the amount of production each panel has throughout the year. And when it comes to shading, it's really a great solution. I've encountered a couple times where microinverters have been used in systems that are out in the open and will never have any shading occur. And that type of application with a microinverter is not necessarily the best approach. A string inverter or an optimized string inverter is a better system for that, where you have no shade issues whatsoever throughout the year, because it's far more cost effective, because essentially a microinverter itself is a little computer. It does take some of that produced energy from the panels to power itself. The string inverter takes less energy out of the system to operate. It's simpler, but it does the trick in the case of large installments. So there was a large installment with microinverters done in PEI. The project was very overpriced because they used microinverters when they could have just used string inverters, and it would have worked just as well. So something to keep in mind. Going to go, and I think I have a story, but I think I'll leave it up to questions because I know there's questions I keep seeing pop-ups. So let's go to questions right now.
Can you stop sharing your screen?
Yes, I can.
That would be easier to see who has a question already.